You can start, Julie.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Greetings, greetings, greetings to you all, and welcome to Kōrero for Change on Employment. I'm that blind woman, Julie Woods, professional speaker, author, advocate, and coach, coming to you today from Ōtepoti, Dunedin. It's very exciting to be here. I'm excited, and so is everyone on the panel and the Juliana today. So thank you. This webinar is brought to you by Access Matters Aotearoa Trust and kindly sponsored by the J.R. Mackenzie Trust, supported by Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People, and special thanks goes to People First for their support in adapting the written transcripts to Easy Read. Welcome, welcome to you all to this webinar, Kōrero for Change on Employment. I'm going to start by asking Juliana to do some digital housekeeping before we have our karakia from Patipoa.
Kia ora. Just so we can all make sure the webinar is accessible for all. So after each panel, the audience can participate using the Q&A to submit questions. If for any accessibility reasons you need to speak or sign to ask your question, you can use the raise your hand option at the bottom of the screen, and our team will allow you to use the audio and video to pose your question. We have two options for captioning. One is available on the webinar screen, and you can access this by clicking on the captions at the bottom of your screen. The second option is using a live transcript link that Kimberly will post now in the chat. This webinar will be recorded and made public on Access Matters website. By remaining in the webinar, you consent to being recorded. And we would like now to invite Patipoa, Policy Advisor at DPA, to welcome us with a karakia.
Me ingoe I tātou, whānau. Hakataka te hau ki te uru, hakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina kina ki ota, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hia ki ana te ātā kura, he tio, he hoka, he hauhu, ti he wa mauri ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Patty. And now we are going to hand our kōrero over to the Disability Rights Commissioner from the Disability Rights Commission, Prudence Walker. Welcome to you this morning, Prudence. You are going to be talking about ableism in employment. And just a reminder for all of us that ableism is the discrimination that disabled people face when non-disabled people believe they are superior. So we welcome you, Prudence, to this kōrero and look forward to hearing what you have to say about ableism in employment.
Kia ora. Inga mana, inga reo, rauranga tērā mā. Tēnei te mihi ki a koutou. Ko Peter Denny, ko Lady Nugent, te waka o Oko Tipuna. I whānau mai a hau ki Papaioia, ke Ōtautahi e noho ana. Ko kai hautu te kahauatanga mo te kāhui, te tangata ki Aotearoa a hau. Ko Prudence Walker toko ingoa. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. Just to clarify, my role of Disability Rights Commissioner sits with the Human Rights Commission. I know often no, that's fine, and I know there's often a lot of confusion with the Health and Disability Commission, but just to be clear that it's the Human Rights Commission as we are established under the Human Rights Act. So our role and function is a lot to do with discrimination under the Human Rights Act. I'm delighted to be here today to discuss this important issue because the right to work is fundamental, both as a right in itself and because it affects many of our other rights, such as participating, having a decent standard of living, work where we can make connection, a source of friends. It can provide personal and professional development, and it may add meaning to our lives. As diverse disabled people, we all have different relationships with work. Some of us are employers, some of us are employees, some of us are looking for work. Some of us might have given up hope of finding work after many setbacks or not being encouraged to think about work at all. Some of us have contributions to make outside of a paid workplace. But whatever our experiences with work, I'm pretty sure most of us will have faced challenges. Many of us might not use the term ableism to describe those challenges, but when we look at the causes underlining them, we can often find a system of ableism operating in employment, which of course is a reflection of ableism in society. Is this context by ableism, It's in this context, by ableism, I'm referring to systems that are not designed with us or to include us and that devalue our lives, our rights, and our contributions. In relation to work, it can show in lots of ways, such as, are we expected to be in the workplace? Are the buildings or equipment accessible? Are the application forms and processes accessible? Are we seen as unfortunate or risky or costly employees? Or are we asked questions about our health that make us fearful that we could be discriminated against? Is the support we get to look for work or participate fully in work time limited or inflexible? Can tangata whaikaha Māori access kaupapa Māori supports? Do we feel safe to be open about our impairments and confident to state the reasonable accommodations we need? Do employers understand their duty to provide reasonable accommodations? Are we valued in the workplace? Are we, as disabled employees, paid the same as colleagues doing the same job? Do we get the same opportunities for promotion or further training? Do we experience bullying or harassment? There are also barriers and systems outside of workplaces, but that hugely affect our opportunities for and at work, such as, did we get the right support and education? Do we have adequate housing that provides a place of rest, security, and dignity? Do we have support for daily living if we need it? And is it flexible to our work needs, or indeed to participate in finding work we may wish to seek? Is there affordable and accessible public transport or private parking near work? Acknowledging, as I said before, that our experiences are varied, for too many of us, we won't be able to give positive answers to those questions. And that shows an ableist system of values, where only certain ways of being in the world with so-called typical minds and bodies count or are valued. A system that sees our lives as disabled people as unfortunate and difficult. Beliefs such as these result in prejudice, inequality, and discrimination against us, and underpin legislation, policies, and practices such as segregated or sheltered employment. For example, here in Aotearoa, the minimum wage exemption, or the data that for years has shown huge gaps, currently almost 40% between our employment rate and that of those non-disabled people. We see gaps like this reported all around the world, with disabled people more likely to be unemployed, underemployed, and underestimated. And for people with some impairments, for women and Indigenous people, the gaps can be even bigger because of the harm, for example, sexism and racism compound the harms of ableism. So there's lots of work needed to dismantle ableism and give us fair opportunities for work. We've had various campaigns and strategies over the years that have not really made a significant difference. We need our human rights to be the foundation for any future action. We as disabled people need to be actively involved in developing any law, policy, or practice that affects us as equal partners with employers, businesses, and union bodies. We need to have our rights to support for equitable participation, for accessibility and reasonable accommodations in seeking and securing work legally recognised. Whether directly or indirectly, ableist beliefs about our capabilities can lead to discriminatory actions, and even if those actions stop tomorrow, the disparity in our employment would take decades to be eliminated. So while I know it is sometimes a contested concept and can be misinterpreted, I think we do need to consider options like affirmative action, or also in some contexts known as temporary special measures. Affirmative action recognises that equal treatment will not be enough to achieve equity. And I want to be very clear that affirmative action doesn't mean overlooking merit, and it doesn't automatically mean quotas. It can be through public procurement processes, for example, or many other ways, all of which should involve disabled people in the development of those strategies. I know my fellow speakers will also have lots of practical and effective ideas. I'm disappointed that I won't have a chance to stay and listen today, but I'll catch up on the recording. And I look forward to us all working together to dismantle the ableist structures that get in the way of us living our lives and making our diverse and valuable contributions. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Prudence. Thank you very much. And in the words of Helen Keller, alone we can do so little, together we can do so much. Thank you for everything that you are doing to remove ableism from Aotearoa New Zealand. Next, we are going to welcome Juliana Carvalho, the Project Manager at Access Matters Aotearoa Trust, to talk to us about quotas in employment schemes. Juliana.
Kia ora. Thank you so much, Julie, and thank you so much for this very power korero you're bringing in today. So, how quota schemes create pathways to employment for disabled people? Imagine you're qualified, eager to work, full of potential, but every door remains shut because of systemic barriers. Let me share a personal story. After graduating with a degree in communication studies, majoring in advertising, I pursued freelance work and I applied for jobs in small advertisement agencies. Despite my qualifications, I couldn't secure a job. It was just until I applied for a public service role in the parliament of my state in Brazil that I could finally get a chance. And that was thanks to disability employment quota. I literally got my wheel in the door and I began a very rewarding career. Affirmative action policies like quota scheme can shift systemic barriers. From Brazil to Germany, Japan, evidence show that quota systems significantly increase employment opportunities for disabled people and strengthen workplace diversity. So let me talk about the power of the quota systems. In Brazil, legislation mandates companies with 100 employees or more to hire between 2 and 5% of workers with a disability. The impact is that over 400,000 disabled people gain formal employment, 30% increase in employment for disabled people in formal sectors, 90% of job rotation rate for disabled workers.
Good morning.
Exceeding.
Good, thank you. And yourself?
Sorry, if you can mute yourself.
So just the normal mornings at the moment. Doesn't seem to be getting better this year. Like normally February, March is a write-off, but we're in April now.
I'm just trying to find. It's Phil that was talking. Just muted him. Apologies for that. So, as I was saying, 90% of job rotation rate for disabled workers exceeding non-disabled peers, reduced reliance on government benefits, increased tax revenues, and for me, most importantly, enhanced awareness of disability rights. In Germany, companies with 20 or more employees, they must fill 5% of the roles with disabled workers or they pay a fine. The results, there is 85% of compliance, 600 million euros raised annually from fines are reinvested into disability employment programs, and the enforcement leads to a 7% increase in disability hires with positive effects across business networks. In Japan, the private sector is mandated to have a 2.3% quota, and the public sector 2.6%. And the companies face financial penalties for non-compliance. The impact is that 50% increase in the disability employment over 2 decades. Manufacturing firms show improved hiring without compromising profits. Small business often comply voluntarily as they grow due to strong incentives. So why quota works? Well, first, the economic impact. It reduces government welfare costs. It taps into underutilized talent, boosting innovation and diversity. The social impact, it raises awareness of disabled people's rights. It encourages accessible environments and shifts company culture. And the proven outcomes is that, as I said before, there's a higher job rotation rates and productivity in inclusive workplaces. Quota create visibility and open doors to stable formal employment. But what about New Zealand? New Zealand current landscape is quite peculiar. 97% of New Zealand businesses have fewer than 20 employees. So a tailored, multi-tiered approach will be needed. Imagine if, for example, we have large companies and government mandatory quotas between 3 and 5%, for example, and media enterprises with 20 to 99 employees could have voluntary targets with tax incentives. And for the small business with 20 or less employees, they could be supported to training, subsidies, and accessibility grants. 2017 study from the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research found that if just 5% of the currently unemployed disabled people were employed, the economy will grow by 1.45 billion. Employing 14,000 disabled individuals will align with the employment rate with the national average. But we know that the quota scheme is not perfect, and what we need is a comprehensive approach. For the quota systems, they are effective, but they're not enough on their own. So governments should combine them with financial incentives like wage subsidies, tax credits, grants for accessibility. Programs like the US Work Opportunity Tax Credit and the Australia Disability Employment Service show positive results. There's also need to be employment services and job training, job coaching, workplace preparation, and post-hiring support. Awareness and anti-discrimination, campaigns that shift attitudes and eliminate bias, and also have strong legal protections that enforce non-discrimination in hiring. Some final thoughts. Affirmative actions isn't about giving special treatment. It's about leveling the playing field. I got my wheels in the door because of a quota system, and my career flourished. How many others are missing that chance? True inclusion requires collective action, partnerships between government, businesses, education, health, disability support services. New Zealand has a chance to lead with a model that fits its business landscape, economy, and values. When are we going to step up? Thanks, Julie. Back to you.
Kia ora, Juliana. And we're so pleased that you got your wheels in the door. Imagine life without having Juliana Carvalho's wheels through the door. And thank you for putting the spotlight on the disability economy. I don't think it gets talked about enough, and good for us to think about the disability economy to speak the language of business. So thank you very much, Juliana. We're going to move now to the first of our 4 panel discussions. And the panel discussions are based on the 4 pillars of society, which are the deciders, the thinkers, the creators, and the doers. And leading the deciders today, panel 1 is Debbie Ward, National Disability Leadership Coordinator from CCS Disability Action. Welcome to you, Debbie. And I have a quotation that I would like to dedicate to you and your panelists, your decider panelists. It's from Jim Rohn, American entrepreneur and motivational speaker. He says, "It doesn't matter which side of the fence you get off sometimes. What matters is getting off. You cannot make progress without making decisions." So welcome, Debbie, and we look forward to your panel discussion.
Oh, kia ora, Julie. Morning, everyone. It's my privilege to be able to introduce to you today our deciders. So we have Lucy Langston, who is the Manager of Disability and Out-of-School Care and Recreation, otherwise known as OSCAR, at the Ministry of Social Development. We've got Richard Wagstaff, President of the New Zealand Council of Trade Unions, and then we've got Andrew Craig, who is the Policy Director, Employment Skills and Immigration Policy Labour Science Enterprise Group for Ministry of Business and Employment. Well, that was a mouthful, Andrew. Unfortunately, at this stage, we don't have our 4th panelist, Paul Mackey, who is from Employment Relations Policy Manager for Business New Zealand. But welcome, Lucy, Richard, and Andrew. Lovely to have you here today. So we're just going to jump into each of you having 5 minutes for your initial statement addressing the question. And the question is, what is the role of employment in the process of inclusion and belonging of people with disabilities? What is the role of employment in the process of inclusion and belonging of people with disabilities? And Lucy, are you okay to go first?
Yes, I am. I hope I can contribute something to that question. So as one of a broad spectrum of agencies supporting disabled people to realise better lives, MSD works closely with the sector, providers and disabled people to make sure our services are as effective as possible. MSD exists to help people become safe, strong and independent. MSD understands that for those able to work, employment can make a considerable difference to well-being, and this includes for disabled people or those living with health conditions or neurodiversity. So employment can increase a sense of purpose and self-esteem, provide financial security, community engagement, and there is increasing evidence that it can have positive effects on health and well-being. It supports people and families to be independent. We want everyone to know that we are here to help and support them in achieving their employment goals. We recognise that disabled people often have diverse challenges and support needs, facing additional barriers in the workplace, as many will discuss today. But for those people who are able to work, MSD does offer support to move towards sustainable employment. We understand that gaining at work can be harder for some, and we provide a range of direct assistance to help people into work through case managers, employment coordinators, and work brokers who assist in accessing training opportunities, employment, grants, and financial assistance. So disabled people have access to these general employment resources, but also they have access to services that recognise the specific additional challenges that they may face. It's these additional services that I want to talk you through today and focus the rest of my time on. So MSD contracts with a wide range of community-based organisations to provide specialist employment support for disabled people. These programs are tailored to individuals' needs and goals and help disabled people to find and secure and sustain employment. They work with local employers to identify opportunities. They work to remove barriers to potential employment with each individual and employer and provide ongoing in-work support for up to 2 years. We fund the Employment Service in Schools, which supports disabled secondary school students to plan for their future and explore job and career opportunities. So this service was established in 5 regions as a pilot in 2020 and is available in those 5 regions until June 2026. We have the Mainstream program, which helps connect employers and disabled people by providing access to a range of wage subsidies to help disabled people gain paid work experience in their chosen field. This is paid directly to the employer to pass on to the disabled people and lasts up to 1 year. It's accessed via our contracted providers. And finally, we have Disability Business Enterprises, which can help provide employment, training, and skill development in a safe setting. MSD contributes funding to these organisations to provide support and supervision of disabled employees. Overall, we fund a mix of providers, some who specialise in working with people with particular health conditions or disabilities, but others who provide a more general model that focuses on having strong relationships with employers and expertise in breaking down employer-related barriers and misperceptions. Our advice is look on the website to find providers in a local area and find one that works. People can try different providers if the first doesn't seem a good fit, and they don't need to contact MSD. Just approach providers directly. MSD is committed to reviewing these specialist programs over the next 18 months. So the review is focused on improving client experience of service and how services work together to support disabled people at all stages of the employment journey. Our aim is to make sure they remain relevant to the needs of disabled people and employers in a modern workplace. We've worked with Disability Support Services to ensure they share any relevant learnings from their recent community engagement, which we can incorporate into our work and avoid people having to tell MSD the same thing over again. This project will take some time to complete, but we will be engaging with service users and providers of existing services as part of it. I just wanted to highlight a few other employment-related programs for disabled people because I think employment is important to inclusion, but one of the barriers is knowledge about what is already available. So the first of these is Jobs and Training Support Funds, which assist disabled people with the additional employment-related costs. So these are employment-related costs they have because of their disability, that someone who is not disabled doesn't have. So there are 2 parts to Jobs and Training Support Funds. Job support and training support. Job support helps people with the costs when they're in employment, and training support helps people cover training-related costs. For both these programs, this can include things such as transport, specialist software or equipment, and for job support, it can also include workplace modification grants. In some cases, clients can also access a disability allowance, which helps with disability-related costs, because this recognises that being able to access the healthcare you need can also improve your ability to be in work, part-time or full-time. Finally, if someone has left school, wants to work, but isn't yet ready to apply for jobs, some of our community participation service providers offer volunteering, training, and work experience opportunities as part of their programs. These programs can also be a great place for people to develop the general life skills they require to sustain work. And we're currently working to add new places to these existing community participation services to support more people and address wait lists. So within MSD, we recognise that employment is important, and we're working hard to try and ensure that we support the employment of disabled people and that any changes we make with existing employment products and services are done carefully and whenever possible with the involvement of people who use our services. Thank you.
Kia ora, Lucy, ngā mihi. Very interesting to hear all the additional services that are available to support disabled people into employment. Thank you for sharing that. We'll just go straight over to Richard. There will be time for some of the questions that are coming in to be answered after each of the panelists have had a chance to talk. So Richard, hand it over to you.
Kia ora morena, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you for having me on this panel. It's been a real privilege to listen to the contributions that we've had so far, particularly Juliana and Prudence. That's been really helping build my understanding of the conversation, so thank you. I wanted to perhaps kick off with talking a little bit about work and where the trade union movement comes from when we think about work. We think work is extremely important, done well. That is that work should be freely available to people who want it, and it should be a place where people build their confidence, their knowledge, their sense of value, their potential. They should feel like an investment. It should be a place where they get real dignity and a sense of purpose and meaning in their lives. And that's certainly true for everybody, but I think that I'm sure that has a particular meaning for people with disabilities. But we also think that work can be quite hazardous if it's done badly. And actually, in fact, many people experience work as a place where they lose their dignity, they lose their confidence. They're certainly not safe and healthy, and it's insecure and a dreadful experience. So overall, we would say that absolutely work can make a massive contribution to all people. But it's not necessarily the case. Just having a job doesn't mean it's always a good job, and it's important that jobs are as good as they can be. And that's kind of what I want to talk about, is actually how we do work in New Zealand, in particular how we think about how we do work in relation to people with disabilities. Unfortunately, at the moment, the employment sector is not promoting inclusion and belonging for people with disabilities and access needs. We know the statistics, the unemployment rate, which is too high for everybody, but for disabled people, it's 11% compared to 4.5% for non-disabled people. To sort of compound that figure, just 44.7% of disabled people are part of the labour force, either employed or actively looking for work, compared to 84.1% of non-disabled people. So I'm sure people on this call are aware of those statistics and what it feels like to be on the receiving end of them. Often conversations from this assume that disabled people are excluded from work because of their impairments. In order to change the current conversations, it's vital that everybody understands that disabled work are excluded from work because of the decisions we've made as a society and in our workplace about how we organise and arrange work. And this conversation is something that we're very clear about, and it's an evolving sort of conversation happening all the time now, that we're very clear that work should be a place that's human-centred, that actually work should be designed and arranged around the people who work there, not the reverse. And increasingly in the sort of technological age, this question is becoming a bigger and bigger question, because all too often works is being arranged around machines and AI, and not in the reverse. And so, I've got an example here that KFC, for example, once had a track record of hiring people with learning disabilities. And there are many different roles within KFC where people with learning disabilities could be rostered for roles that they could do. So they arranged their work so people with disabilities could apply themselves. But then in 2013, KFC made a decision that every employee had to be able to complete every role to the highest level. And of course, that threatened to make workers with learning disabilities around the country redundant on the grounds that they could not perform every role. It's a simple example. Fortunately, KFC workers have a union called Unite, and Unite mobilised alongside others to object to these changes, and these workers kept their jobs. But it's a very simple example of a deliberate decision with a very deliberate outcome that was unfair to disabled people and didn't need to be made, and was inconsiderate. This example shows how employers' decisions about work design, how tasks are arranged into jobs, exclude disabled people from the workforce. KFC was quite unusual in arranging their work in the first place to ensure that the roles were for people with learning disabilities. Unfortunately, most workplaces haven't given that enough thought. This is just one example of how decisions are made about work design that exclude disabled people. Disabled people who don't drive, for example, are often excluded from work that they could do, because it is grouped with work that does require driving, and it could be designed differently. People whose capacity for work varies are needlessly excluded from jobs rather than being able to arrange the work to accommodate, such as varying hours of work. In our society, work design is mostly the purview of the employer. There are very few limits on employers' rights to arrange work, even though the way work is arranged systematically excludes disabled people, and this needs to be addressed. We could arrange work and organise work differently. We could arrange work to welcome everyone's contribution. That would ensure inclusion and belonging for people with disabilities and access needs. That may seem far-fetched, but work design is constantly changing, and so the opportunity is there. And I think the way work is designed and arranged is becoming more prevalent in conversations in workplaces, not less, for all people. Unions are very interested in the quality of work and the culture of work and the design of work. For us, we don't see ourselves as simply concerned with how much pay people get or how secure people's jobs are. For us, as I started my discussion, we're really interested in the experience of work and what it does for people and the quality of work and how work should be good, and we need to make work good, not just accept the way work is all too often done. We're very concerned that for many workplaces, the culture of work is what is sort of derived from a master-servant, command and control kind of culture and approach, which doesn't bring out the best in people and certainly doesn't make people feel welcome or accommodated. It makes people feel like a cost rather than an asset. An important union aim is workplace democracy, and in democratic workplaces, work could be arranged around people and be human-centred. When we talk about workplace democracy, we don't mean a vote on every decision. We mean creating a culture where everybody is included and expected to contribute to the way things are arranged and the decisions that are made within workplaces through an attempt to gain consensus. Once we have imagined a better world, we need to identify the next steps to make that world a reality. It's a long journey, but here are a couple of steps right now I'd like to put forward. The first step is addressing government discrimination against disabled people in work. In 2023, just 5.5% of working in the core public service were disabled, compared to 14% of working age people. And this is a huge lost opportunity. The public sector can lead by example and can be an exemplar of best employment practice, and certainly an exemplar of how to work with and have disabled people working within the large public sector. Recently, Te Kawa Mataho has developed a 4-point plan to address this discrimination. It's a small but important step. This work must be supported and built on, not got rid of by those who want to treat diversity, equity, inclusion as a dirty word, and that's something that we're seeing far too much of in today's world. Another step is repealing legislation that provides fewer workplace rights for disabled people. The current minimum wage exemption scheme allows people with learning disabilities to be paid less than the minimum wage. The union movement has long fought this change and will insist that worker rights apply to all workers, including minimum standards at the very least. At the moment, the debate around...
Sorry, Richard, to interrupt. Unfortunately, we do have to move on to some of the couple other panel. But what you're saying is extremely interesting, and really do like the real life examples, and also want to make sure we've got some time to answer some questions. So what you've got left might...
All good. I was about to wrap up, so that's fine. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Do appreciate that. So we'll move, welcome Paul to the panel. We'll just hear from Andrew, and then we will come to you, Paul.
Cool.
So,
yep. Thank you.
After you, Andrew.
Right. Kia ora, everyone, and thank you, Debbie. Like Richard, people with disabilities is not an area we've done a lot of work in, so I'm really interested in hearing those conversations, and really I think that public perceptions and how we think about that is a real key issue here, which is very hard to move, and I think hopefully we can think about what we can do there. But I was just going to step back and talk a little bit about, as roles in the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, what's our role in the system to try help understand how systems working for lots of different groups, and what do we do when we're thinking about how do we encourage participation in the workforce for different groups, and what are some of the systems, levers and trade-offs that we think about, and how we think about framing those for ministers who ultimately are the decision makers about where to change settings or to invest. So employment is usually a good thing. We know it produces material resources and choices for people, and good employment outcomes are associated with lots of other outcomes that are important for people. physical and mental health amongst them, housing, a sense of connectedness and belonging. And compared to other countries, New Zealand has quite high labour market participation, which is great. But we also know that New Zealand's labour market has seen persistent gaps in both participation and outcomes for some key groups, including Māori and Pacific people, people with disabilities and youth. And not everyone who would like to work is currently able to access work. So the government plays lots of roles in supporting participation in the labour market, from regulatory frameworks that work out through to what the rules are for employment, through to compulsory education system, and then more active programs like active labour market interventions, kind of programs that kind of subsidise employment or teach particular skills. And in thinking about labour market participation, there's lots of good evidence that our experiences can shape us quite a lot, and they can accumulate and magnify what happens in early life. So one of the key things we work on is how can the government provide support earlier when they can make the most difference. For example, the development of core skills, which is things like your child and youth strategy, the education curriculum, literacy and maths foundation, which are really valuable to all groups. And then there's a question about pathways into jobs, the careers strategy, careers education, giving people a sense of what are the opportunities out there and what choices do they need to make to make the most of those opportunities. And then it's about helping people develop skill sets that are in demand. The government's got work underway with vocational reform. How do we work out what is the economy saying they need, and how do we make sure people are getting those skills? I do quite a bit of work with immigration, so we see a lot of that kind of whereas we're supplementing the domestic workforce with international migrants, and how do we think about where that can be opportunities for the domestic workforce to fill those gaps. And obviously, if people have left work, and how can they help them support to get back into work, whether that's supporting them upskilling, finding opportunities, matching them with employers, or working through that. And some things there are clearly really important to everyone. For example, the basic literacy and numeracy skills that are taught to everyone and are really valuable to all groups, whether they're doing well at the moment or they're those groups that might be challenged a bit to find and stay in employment. But there are others out there who will need more targeted and intensive support to thrive in the workplace, or need employer-side interventions to encourage the uptake of that demand not coming from workers in the first place. So the key question I think we had to work through a lot of times when we're looking at different interventions for group is how do we create a compelling case? What are the types of wraparound supports or services or employer interventions or regulatory changes that could make a difference? These things can often be quite expensive for the government directly or for employers working through there. But we also know that the cost of not doing anything for these groups is also expensive. So we're often trying to weigh out that what's the pros and cons of doing something versus not doing something? What do we know about effectiveness, and how can we get the system as a whole to pull together? And the other thing is really, I think the other foundation of employment is obviously labour demand. When we're in a economy where there's low unemployment and lots of employers out there looking for jobs, it does increase the opportunities for people to get into jobs that might not otherwise have made it. I know we saw during the COVID and the border closure, some of the underutilisation rates in New Zealand did fall a bit as people who, maybe might have wanted a few more hours of work or not got work, were able to get into jobs when there was less supply of other workers in the economy. So what this hopefully means is, I think, is as the recession, when New Zealand moves out of a recession, that level of demand will increase, and I think that means we've got some opportunities to talk collectively and with government about what other levers we can work through for different groups, including people with disabilities. Thank you.
Oh, kia ora, Andrew. Yes, very interesting. I think you pose quite a few relevant questions there to support Richard's kōrero around it's not going to be a short journey, it's a long journey. So yeah. So welcome, Paul. We'll hand it over to you just to give a 5-minute introduction and kōrero of whatever you want to say, and then we'll jump into some of the questions that people have been putting in the chat, Q&A chat.
Thank you, and thank you for your patience in letting me connect. It's I'm not in my office. I'm not at home. I'm on a mobile modem, and it's been proving difficult, but we're there. I'd pick up on a few of the things, both especially the things that Richard said, because we, from a Business New Zealand or a business perspective, many of those things are true from both a workers and business perspective. But just as a general theme, the question of disability is one where we've got one of the bigger challenges, the stereotypical attitudes that people have to disability. People often react to a person who is disabled, in quotes, as being incapable, whereas as opposed to taking a view that says that a person with a disability simply is not disabled for everything. They simply have an incapacity in some functional area. Most of which, not many of which, but most of which are able to be worked around. So, for example, a pianist that loses a finger doesn't stop playing the piano. They can still play the piano. They just have to adapt to the lack of one digit. There are pianists out there who are concert pianists who have missing digits. So those sorts of things have set aside the question of you can't do. The other thing too is a person doesn't lose their mind because they've lost their finger. The scale and scope and availability of this huge variety of technology-enabled jobs these days is well within the reach of anybody who is engaged with technology of the like. What the business challenge is that there is this cadre of people out there who have been set aside or left aside, who are more than capable of filling huge gaps in the knowledge economy and in the physical economy, who are being disadvantaged by simply not being recognized as able. And so one of the kind of words that I think that becomes more important is not thinking of people as disabled, but the enablement aspect of things. What is it that these people have that they can contribute? Where can they contribute? How can they contribute? Are all questions that should be there all day, every day for everybody. If we look at the labour stats, there are too many in the NEET category who in fact are people more than capable, but who have been persuaded in one way or another, either by being set aside or ignored in terms of their application, that are capable and available and would be valuable in the workforce. So we hear things in terms of things like recruitment, about things like unconscious bias and recruitment practices. These are all areas I think particularly employers can engage with far more than they currently do, in ways that say, let's not look for the excuse for not having somebody. Let's find out where all of the available capability is that we need for our future. And as our previous speaker just said, we are coming out of a difficult period of economic times, particularly as a result of COVID. The wave of opportunity that comes, even facing challenges such as Trump's tariff barriers and things, there are opportunities going begging there, and there's a workforce going begging for the opportunity to try. So, in terms of this short intervention, I would like to think of the word enablement as being key to everything we do.
Great. Oh, kia ora, Paul. Great kōrero. Absolutely. So true what you've talked about, and the impact that the stereotypes and unconscious biases that might exist in workplaces that do prevent many disabled people from coming in and having an opportunity for employment. So thank you, panel, for your kōrero. We've got lots of questions here. We're not going to have time to look at them all and answer them all. But we do have a few minutes to just look at some of them. And so there was a question that was asked earlier, which I hear asked quite often, and it was a question for you, Lucy. If I can find it in the list, it was up near the top. The question was around if you're not on a benefit and you're not receiving a benefit, but you're still requiring support for employment, whether it's job support or some of the other additional supports that you talked about, are disabled people not receiving a benefit, able to access those additional supports?
Yes, so I answered this in the chat with a link to the relevant website. But yes, the services I talked about today, for the most part, are available to people not on benefit. However, they are limited in availability. So while the providers are clearly listed on our website, that I've put the link in the chat, there may not be capacity with specific providers to always accept everyone who approaches them. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. So
yes,
could they go
but
to MSD directly, or do they have to go through one of the providers if the providers don't have capacity?
I don't know about what the rules are around MSD. Central. I can look it up and I can put a comment in the chat. Sorry, I don't deal with MSD direct delivered services. I only work in the community partner delivered services. So I'm not 100% sure on that rule.
Oh, all good. Thank you. And then we had a question for you, Richard, but it is quite relevant as well for other panelists here if you want to jump in as well. The question is, how can people get organisations to act on their accessibility barriers? And the example that's used in the question is NZCTU posts news and messages on Blue Sky, but it doesn't use alt text despite regular requests. So how can organisations be made to listen and act?
Good question. And I guess it's a question that many will have a perspective on, and it's a question that's been around for a long time, I suspect, and won't go away fast. I think what we need to do is there has to be an awareness raising, and I think many people are unaware of the opportunities to be more inclusive and haven't given it enough thought. And for that reason, for example, we need to identify voices of disabled people and give them a platform and build support and awareness. We have at the CTU we have a series of sector groups, and one of them is Kaimahi Whaikaha, which is for our sector group for disabled people. And what we're trying to do with them is to say, help the CTU become more aware and proactive on these kinds of measures. We've got a long way to go on that, and it's sort of a fledgling organisation, but I think that kind of thing is a useful way for any organisation, is to have a deliberate plan to identify and become more friendly workplaces for all people.
Great. Thanks, Richard. Anyone else from the panel want to respond to that question as well? No? We do have another question here that panelists might be interested in. How are businesses supported and educated in employing disabled people? So you've talked about some of the opportunities that your current workplaces are working on, but what could other businesses do?
I can start. Currently, we work on a model of one-to-one with every opportunity where our providers are trying to place someone. We're expecting that they're educating those providers and building their confidence in working with disabled people. But that's at a very low level, but we hope it has some impact and has some snowball effect.
Perhaps I could also mention too that businesses generally they'll place an advertisement, they'll get a bunch of applications, but they're not necessarily educated or aware of how to process those applications, particularly if there's any indication of a person with some functional issues. And also, they don't know whether or not there's a pool of people out there with functional issues who would be more than appropriate for the role who haven't applied because they don't know where to access them. So there's this disconnect between the pool of available people, the mechanisms by which those people connect, because mostly they're connecting through the likes of the government agencies rather than specifically through recruitment agencies. And given businesses don't necessarily, in fact, probably don't often have active seeking policies for, have we got all of the right people or all of the people who would be good for this job are where it's available. Those sorts of disconnects, I think, are areas of challenge that we could all play a part in, from the union movement through to business organizations as opposed to specific businesses, recruitment agencies and government agencies together working out how to connect those dots up would be one of the good challenges to overcome.
Thanks, Paul.
I was thinking too that I think collectively we have to push back against this anti-DEI diversity, equity, inclusion debate. The direction of travel with that politically is very toxic, and we have to stand our ground and remind people of the value of diversity, inclusion initiatives. And the evidence is clear. We will organisations that adopt those approaches will be more successful, but we've got to really combat the disinformation that's going around and stand proud and strong for those principles.
Thank you, Richard. Well, I think we are out of time, Julie. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, thank you, panelists. I'll hand it back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Debbie. You're not out of time. You're perfectly on time. Thank you, panelists, for your kōrero around that question. I just would like to add, and at this moment, be reminded for all of us the definition of disabled people as per the United Nations Article 1 of the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is or are those with long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So what disables people is the barriers. Thank you for coming along and sharing your thoughts on what some of those barriers are. We are going to move on to panel 2, and this panel is the thinkers. Wow, we've got great expectations, Sarah. Our moderator for this panel is Sarah Mitchell, from Head of Employment and Youth Transition at Blind Low Vision NZ. And Sarah, I would like to dedicate a quotation to your panelists, which comes to us from Mahatma Gandhi via the movie Mr. Bates versus the Post Office. And it says, "I will not let you walk through my mind with your dirty feet." So with that note, welcome to this discussion to the thinkers.
Kia ora, Juliana here, Sarah. I'm asking you to unmute because it doesn't give me the option to unmute yourself. To unmute you. And just a quick request for the previous panelists. If you could please go through the Q&A and address the questions that have been unanswered in writing, that would be amazing.
I am muted now, Juliana?
Yes, you are.
Excellent. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, Juliana. And thank you, Access Matters, for inviting me to be a moderator for the Thinkers Group. So looking at the 4 panelists on this group, I felt extremely undereducated. So look, I'd like to welcome, first of all, to the Thinkers panel, Dr. Kate Bruce from Hui'i. Dr. Catherine Ravenswood from AUT, Dr. Gretchen Good from Massey University, and Dr. Pam McNeil from Disability Responsiveness New Zealand. So welcome, panelists, and really looking forward to hearing some of your thinkings. So the question that we are reflecting on as the thinkers is, what is the role of employment in fostering inclusion and belonging? So if we can maybe start with you, Catherine, and if I can just remind everybody, please, to speak clearly and slowly for our signers. Thank you. Over to you, Catherine.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. It really is an honour. It's a little intimidating being called a thinker, although I guess, to be honest, that's what we're meant to be as academics. I'm from a business school at AUT as well, so I guess the thinking, we're always schooled, literally, that our thinking doesn't sit in a little silo of just thought, but has to be relevant to community and to industry. So listening to our series of speakers this morning has been really, really interesting, and the range of voices coming through. with also some kind of shared points of, I guess, of connection around the topic, as we'd expect. And so, for example, Prudence was talking about actually disabled people have a right to work, and that should be fundamental in any of our discussions, and that ableism really informs systems that create discrimination and prevent the inclusion of disabled people in employment. And I was fascinated to hear from Juliana as well that from her own experience, but also global data on the role that government regulation around quotas with incentives or penalties has really made a difference to the employment of disabled people in those countries. As many of you will know, our system and our regulation tends to be kind of reactive rather than proactive. We can make complaints about a lack of our rights, but we don't really have any regulation requiring things like quotas. Key to what I want to say as well was the mention from Juliana and Prudence around the disability economy. And I think Richard Wagstaff talked about this as well. And my key point really is we need to reset the narrative. And actually we have all that information we need to reset that narrative, and all the positive data and results of inclusive employment, both for individuals, communities, business, and our economy. So really, my talk should stop here. Like, we have that information. And what I would like to suggest is that let's rethink the role of business. As Richard mentioned, we're in a time where diversity and inclusion is used as an attack to try and kind of denigrate people. Sorry, I just realized you probably can't see me. Sorry, the sunlight has come in during the panel this morning. And so often we don't always think of the role of business as being the leaders in terms of thought and in terms of social change. And I think given our current political settings globally and some social movements feeding into that are trying to undo the change towards diversity and inclusion, then it seems obvious that business can actually create the change rather than waiting for governments, which are so heavily influenced by politics and voters, to create the regulation. So I think reset the role of business to be the people creating the change and cementing social change and inclusive employment. Some things we might need to think about in how we do that is around the design of jobs, and Richard Wagstaff talked to that as well. So can we, for example, bring universal design more into how we think about work? Not just the physical structures, wages, but also training and career opportunities. See each individual as a person who wants training, who wants opportunities to try new things. Business and job and employment as one of the ways that we can actually provide new experiences for people. But also we need to rethink productivity. Productivity is always kind of the top line in our economy, and we tend, especially now, and we tend to think of it rather narrowly. We have a pretty tight focus on efficiency, often related to reducing labour costs and making workers or encouraging workers to work harder and longer. That doesn't work for probably most people. So let's rethink productivity. Let's think of the investment in our communities and societies, where if we If business creates inclusive employment, inclusive workplaces, then it provides opportunities for disabled and non-disabled together to work, to create change and change our perspectives on what is productive and what are good workers. Let's view that investment as social investment, as investment in technology, and investment in creating that social cohesion that currently is lacking. So I feel like that's probably my 5 minutes. So to sum up, I would say let's set business, let's challenge business to be the leaders, to create inclusive employment, to challenge our thoughts on productivity, and to ensure that we have inclusive employment and contribute to the social cohesion that we're starting to lack.
Thanks very much, Catherine. Appreciate that, and really totally endorse your thoughts around flipping that narrative onto its head around the social inclusion and the positive impact that disabled people can actually have in the workplace. Great. So next, Kate, if we can ask you to please answer the question around employment and how that goes to fostering inclusion and belonging.
Oh, kia ora, Sarah, kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Really fantastic to be joining this this conversation today. Ko Waio no Ingarangi o, ko Romani te iwi, ko Katie toko ingoa. Now, I'm not coming to you as an academic with expertise in disability. I was an academic in a different area in a previous life, but I do come to you today as an employer, as a mum of neurodivergent kids, and as someone with ADHD myself as well. So I work for Huie, and we are a charity, and we're a peak body in the community sector, and we're all about systems change so that communities, hapu, iwi, can do what they do best. We do this through creating spaces for collaboration, including coordinating the community constellation of peak bodies and capacity building organisations in our sector. So I'm struck, I guess, especially listening to some of the other episodes in this series, how interconnected all of this is, and bringing another one of those to the table really is justice. So I was recently involved in an independent review of bias in New Zealand Police. And as part of that work, tangata whaikaha, deaf and disabled people shared their experiences of criminalisation and of use of force by police. And of course, having a criminal record absolutely impacts your employment opportunities. So really just thinking about, and for us, we found police didn't even capture any data on disability in their system. So it didn't even know how many disabled people they were interacting with. So all of these conversations about education, about the media, about justice are just so interconnected. But of course, today we're talking about employment. And Prudence, pointed out right at the beginning the huge 40% employment gap that we have in the rate of employment of disabled and non-disabled people. And I think whenever I see statistics like this, I am reminded actually of childhood experiences that I had the time I thought were entirely normal, and I certainly hope that will be the case in the future. But I saw amazing positive examples of inclusive employment as a child, actually. So my dad ran a disability organisation in the UK, and I will always remember Alison. So Alison worked on reception. She radiated joy in her job. Alison has a learning disability, and as a child, I don't remember very many people at my dad's work. I remember Alison because she took the time and she to interact with me positively, to support me in that environment. as in a way that children don't always experience from adults, actually. And there's another brief experience that I'll share with you is a man who was really, really motivated to work because, of course, work is where a lot of us get our purpose and our social connection and all of those other things that employment can bring. And he knew that he had some real skills, but faced real barriers because the only movement he had in his body was in his finger. But he would notice all of the details around him. And so a job in security in a shopping mall where he would look at all of the cameras was an absolute fantastic match for him and a really positive experience for him entering employment. And these are just examples. They're not, they're individual examples, but they're examples of how when we're curious about what people are actually interested in and what skills they have, and then we adapt the environment, we can create real benefits for people, but also for society. Because the best experience that I've ever had of working in a team was in an extremely diverse team at Mana Mokopuna at the Children's Commission a few years ago. We had disabled people in leadership roles and a really, really amazing experience because our work was better. We did better work because of the diversity of the team that we had. And without accessibility legislation, without an inclusive culture, that was a challenge because we had to go guerrilla. And by go guerrilla, I mean that I had to carry around a tape measure when we would go to venues to measure the width of the doors. I had to have tape with me every morning to because the accessible toilet was too stiff, and if we put some tape over the side of it before the landlord got to fixing it, then it worked okay. And these are all things, and adapting job descriptions, modeling inclusive communication were things that were really easy things and things that were my job because I was the manager. It was my job to create that space, but it was in spite of, because of the broader culture, because of the context in which we work. And I really hope that we can, have a conversation about some of the legislation and some of the broader changes that are needed to do. Now, one more quick thing I wanted to say, which is last week, Statistics New Zealand launched an update of their general social survey for volunteering rates. So I've had a quick look at that. Now, if the gap is 40% for employment, it drops to 5% for volunteering. So actually a quick look shows that disabled people volunteer on average 4 hours a week more than non-disabled people, those people who do volunteer. And 25% of disabled volunteers over the age of 15 volunteer over 25 hours a month. And this is 19.5% for non-disabled people. Now, this brings up broader questions about what we value as a society, how we recognize these contributions, as well as what we can learn from volunteering about where the barriers are clearly lower. But it is those broader things about value and employment that I thought was important to bring today. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. And look, those stats are really interesting. Often people are very happy to have disabled volunteers, but when played position becomes available, they're not the right person for the job. So just very quickly, one point I'd like to pick up on that you did say was around those two scenarios with Alison. So she obviously had a sense of belonging and fostering inclusion, but also she made you feel the same because she made a huge impact on you and you still remember her now. And I think the big takeaway is that it's about what people can do. It's not about what they can't do. So thank you, Kate. Gretchen, over to you now.
Marina, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Gretchen Good. My sign name is the American sign for the letter G on top of my head because I am short. That sign name was gifted to me by a deafblind teenager over 40 years ago when we were roller skating together. So I'm an academic in disability and rehabilitation studies at Massey with a background in vocational rehabilitation services. But more importantly, I'm a mom to 2 teenagers with Down syndrome, and I want them and every disabled person to have a future where they are fully included with meaningful work and meaningful pay, just like everybody else. I know the impact of vocational rehabilitation services firsthand because at the age of 19, I lost my vision suddenly. And I navigated blindness for a decade, and then I regained a significant amount of my vision. I'm grateful for the rehabilitation and the vocational support I received, but I have a lot to say about what could be improved about it. And of course, as we're all talking about today, employment is a right, not a privilege. And according to Article 27 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, we're guaranteed the right to fair, inclusive employment. But in New Zealand, these promises are being broken, and our vision from our disability strategy is also being blurred right now. We've heard lots of people talk already this morning about the reality, and research will show us that disabled people face twice the unemployment rate. We face underemployment and poverty rates, and our education and health systems fail to prepare or support disabled people into work. So despite all that, we know through research that employment changes lives, it reduces reliance on benefits, it improves well-being, and inclusive hiring boosts productivity and reduces turnover. So it benefits everybody. I don't know that we need new ideas. I think we need action. We already know what works. I think what we need is more and support for supported employment programs and the importance of placing people into jobs first, followed by on-the-job training. That's how everybody else gets their training, on the job. I think far too many people have drawers filled with training certificates that don't lead to jobs. So I am a proponent of supported employment where we give people with the most complex needs placed into jobs and supported with job coaches and whatever support is needed with no intention to withdraw that support and on-the-job training. We've seen those programs work. We've got great models of those supported employment programs that work. And of course, we need funding. We need to invest in getting and keeping disabled people in their jobs. Of course, we need attitude shifts, especially among employers and policymakers. And we need creative, reasonable accommodations. We've heard some talks about that this morning, some wonderful, creative, reasonable accommodations. Small changes can make a big impact, and they don't always have to be expensive. Some reasonably priced equipment can allow somebody to get and keep a job, and they have to be able to acquire that equipment in a timely manner. Flexi time, job sharing, rest periods, those reasonable, creative accommodations can help disabled keep working. We learned a lot of this during COVID, and we need to learn from those lessons that we got in COVID, that those changes can help disabled people stay in jobs, and they help everybody. I think we also need to emphasize that essential functions of the job need to be addressed. And Richard talked about that earlier today. Job ads and employers need to focus when they're recruiting on essential functions of a job. For example, whether someone has a driver's license, it doesn't matter if they can get to where they need to go for a job. Somebody can get to where they need using a bicycle or walking or public transportation or Uber. A driver's license is not required for every job. Just what's essential is that a person can get somewhere. And that's how jobs need to be advertised. And that's how employers need to be recruiting, with bearing in mind what the essential functions of the job are. So we know what needs to be done and we know why, but how are we going to make these things happen? And that's the question we're all asking ourselves today. I think of a couple of practical things we can do. Tell our stories. We need to humanize our narratives and talk about successful disabled people on the job. And we need to be visible in the workplace, as representation matters. I think we need to put disability content into teacher training, into business education, into professional development. We need to support co-created disability awareness campaigns. Of course, nothing about us without us, and we need to keep working on disability awareness. We need to challenge ableism. We can do that with courage and with legislation and with litigation if necessary. We need to increase funding, of course. We need to invest in supported employment, like I talked about earlier. And let's get the word out, give out the evidence that inclusive workplaces benefit everybody. It's good for the bottom line. And I don't think that that information is out there and widely available. I think we need to use the Enabling Good Lives principles, and we need to remind the government about our obligations to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So my closing thoughts are that employment for disabled people should be the default, not the exception. And let's stop calling it support. Let's make reasonable accommodations in the workplace part of the basic infrastructure for any business and throughout all of our communities. Thanks.
Thank you, Gretchen. So many great points there. It's a right, not a privilege, and that visibility aspect. How can a business possibly know what their clients or customers need if it's homogenous and they don't have diversity of staff and thought? So thank you. So our final panelist for the Thinkers is Pam. Pam, welcome, and looking forward to hearing from you. We are running a little, I'm going to get told off for not keeping good time, so maybe about 4 minutes for you, Pam, and then we'll go on to some questions. Thank you.
Kia ora, and thank you for inviting me along as well. I want to start a courageous conversation with my 4 minutes. By focusing on inclusion and belonging through employment in the disability sector itself. This includes all work undertaken in our name, the name of disabled people. So it means within support services, DPOs, government jobs where disability is a focus right across the board. Research shows that barriers to employment, tenure and promotion are prevalent in the disability sector, just as prevalent as they are anywhere else. And I should know, I did the research, and I'm happy to share that with anyone and everyone who might be interested. Ableism is also common, you might be surprised to hear. And this includes casual ableism, which is a term I've developed to mean when people, excuse me, decide that they're going to use terms such as turning a blind eye or a deaf ear or being crippled by death, etc. I think it's important that disabled model what is possible. And I did do that for 18 years when I was the manager of the Mainstream Employment Program. And I korero what Gretchen was just saying, that it's really important that that we do model these things, that supported employment is definitely a way to get your foot, your wheel, your guide dog in the door of employment. And I know that during the time I managed the mainstream program, over 3,000 people got work, and a couple of years after their placements finished, 61% of those people were still in work. So I think that proves that that's a very good way to manage a program for disabled people. Lots of purists say it shouldn't have to happen that way. I agree, but let's face it, we don't live in a perfect world, far from it. At the moment, we're in a position where too many people speak on behalf of disabled people when we're perfectly capable of speaking for ourselves. Many people who work in the disability sector, or the disability industry, as I've heard it called, which then makes us commodities, feel that disabled people are not able to work in some of these positions, that we're not qualified and we don't have the potential that they might have. But how can we promote the abilities of disabled people to others if we don't employ disabled people ourselves? So the sector is currently not practicing what it preaches. An example of this, excuse me, an example of this is a couple of large disability agencies in Australasia recently went to employ their chief executives, and they had lots of applications from disabled people, extremely well qualified, internationally recognised disabled people, and neither of those organisations took up the opportunity. In fact, they did everything they could to avoid doing the right thing, which is employing someone from the group they support. Lived experience of disability needs to be a key component of what we call merit in the disability sector. And by the way, merit actually, as a general principle, advantages the already privileged. But if we're going to talk about merit, let's include lived experience of disability for disability sector work. Disability alone doesn't qualify disabled people for leadership. I know that, but then neither does being non-disabled either. So you don't automatically get a hospital pass if you're non-disabled. Everyone has to have skills, abilities, experience, etc. That's well recognised. The thing that needs to be recognised is that disabled people have the authentic mandate to lead and manage our own sector. Just as others lead and manage their own sectors, it really isn't that difficult to work out why this would be the case. I challenge all of you here today to intentionally attract, recruit, and retain disabled people into work in your sectors, particularly in leadership roles. And I'm very happy for my email to be shared if people would like to hear more about my research. I came up with some very practical ways that we could increase employment, particularly in the disability sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pam. And just like to endorse what you said around, it's about the right person for the right job, and employers don't need to have all the answers. We're very good problem solvers ourselves. So we're now going to go on to Q&A. We have about 5 minutes, and Juliana, if you could maybe read out the first question that's in the chat. Again, panelists, it may be directed specifically to you. If it's not and you'd like to jump in and answer the question, if you could just please, for the benefit of the participants that can't see, just let us know who you are and the organisation again that you're from.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So the first, Juliana speaking here. So one of the questions is, how do we get around still not feeling safe to tell our stories, evidenced by us having to make anonymous comments even here in this space? So this person has put this question anonymously. Our stories aren't always inspirational and don't always flatter potential employers. How do we boldly go there when we also need to make a living?
Can I make a comment, please? It's Pam McNeil here from Disability Responsiveness New Zealand. I would like to hear from you about your stories. I run a monthly podcast called Disability Disruptors. So please do get in touch. I'm really wanting to promote those stories.
Kia ora, Pam, that's awesome. And people are also asking for your research. So if you're able to put it in the chat, a link to your research, that would be amazing.
I'll do my best. I'll send it to you later. I'm sorry, I'm only one-handed at the moment.
All right, no problem. Yeah, we can share that later.
Yeah.
So does anyone would like to share?
Kimberly here. I've already done that. I put the link into the chat.
Oh, yeah, perfect.
Thank you.
So anyone else would like to comment to this question? How do we boldly share our stories without fear of?
Can I jump in here, Sarah, moderator? Look, I think that's the disclosure is also very difficult because you're right, we do want jobs, but we want to feel safe that that's not going to be held against us. And it's always important to also think about if that organisation isn't open to hearing about what you can offer, maybe it's not actually the right environment for you anyway.
Thanks,
Anyone else?
Dr. Gretchen, would you like to comment on that?
We talked about we need to tell our stories with courage, and but we have to calculate the risk to ourselves. I've often speak to people about disclosure. When do you disclose, especially if you are going for job interviews and have an invisible disability? That's a really challenging question. And I often tell people it's your choice. If you're walking into a job interview with a white cane or a guide dog or a wheelchair, you probably will disclose ahead of an interview so that you don't catch people off guard. And but if it's an invisible disability, that's a little more challenging, and it's the choice can be made up to you. But if we can present our disabilities in a positive light in terms of what we've done in terms of leadership, what we have to offer, but you're right, it's about educating the employers. And maybe we need to give them the bottom line about how a diverse workforce can enhance things monetarily for employers. So we need to get that word out and about and just be brave. I know that I often hesitate to take my children who have lots of behavior issues places that we want to go, and it takes courage, but my children are in mainstream school situations, and I have some great hopes for the future because some of the best babysitters we have are the young people who are in school with disabled children now, and they're not fazed so much by it. So I do have hope for the future that disclosure and telling our stories won't be such a horrendous or a frightening or put us at a disadvantage in the future.
Gretchen. Juliana, do we have time for one more, or have we overshot?
We've overshot.
We are overshot, but if you could please, panelists, if you could please go through the Q&A and respond in writing to the outstanding questions, that would be really, really great.
Thank you, thinkers. It's been great hearing your ideas and your thoughts, and obviously some of your research. Collectively, we've got a very powerful group here, but it is a bit of a long haul, so thank you.
Back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Sarah. And you've got a new title, Sarah, Head of the Thinkers. Put that on your CV.
Awesome. I'll tell Andrea.
Thank you, thinkers. That was wonderful to hear your views on employment, disability employment, and this Kōrero for Change. I failed to mention at the beginning 2 important times. One is morning tea, which is right now, and we've got 10 minutes to break, and my watch just told me it was 10:33, so we will come back at 10:43, and we will resume for panels 3 and 4 before we complete this Kōrero for Change at 12 noon. Thank you to all our panelists and moderators for your Kōrero so far. See you back here at 10:43. Welcome back, everybody, to this Kōrero for Change on Employment. I'm that blind woman, Julie Woods, and we will be resuming our conversation about ableism in employment with our final 2 panel discussions. The first one is going to be, we're moving on to the creators. We've had the deciders and the thinkers, and now we are going to hear from the creators. And this moderated panel is going to be done so by Patty Poa from the Disabled Persons Assembly. And Patty is the policy advisor at DPA. And Patty, for you and your creators, I would like to dedicate a quotation from Martin Luther King, who says, almost always the creative, dedicated minority has made the world better. Thank you to you and your creators. Welcome.
Tēnā tātou katoa, nau mai haere mai ki tēnei kōrero rongonui ko Patty Poa hau. Welcome one and all to this very important topic of being creators, and it's Patty Poa speaking. So, and ngā mihi nui, Julie, for that beautiful quote. I love Martin Luther King. He is definitely one of my inspirations. Very happy to have you all here to our speakers. I would like to welcome you and to introduce our panelists into this creation space where we will create together. I'd like to introduce Phil Turner, who is the CEO for the New Zealand Disability Employers Network. And also, please forgive me if I mispronounce this, but Marita Smith, thank you very much for helping with that, who is the CEO of Diversity Works New Zealand. Philip Hendry, who is the CEO for Workbridge, kia ora. And for Jennifer DeBell, who is the Managing Director of Downlights New Zealand. And thank you, Jennifer, you've been here from the very beginning. So looking forward to your conversation, also for your lovely gift of your of what you guys create. So looking forward to this conversation. We have given each of you 5 minutes to address the question of what is the role of employment in the process of inclusion and belonging of people with disabilities. So I'd like to hand it over to each of our speakers. If we could start with Phil, that would be great. Mihi.
Yeah. Kia ora tātou, ko Phil Turner tōku ingoa, ko Chief Executive New Zealand Disability Employers Network. It's a very interesting question. Employment is absolutely centre. It's globally, no matter where you look, as employment moves up, outcomes for people move up, and their engagement in society, everything comes forward and brings it together. Full stop. I should just stop there because it just makes sense. All right. If somebody's employed, they're bringing in an income, everything goes forward and it works. The problem is the question then comes, and listening to all the previous panel discussions, is how do we actually get that to come forward? How do we bring that in? And one of the things I want to introduce with my kōrero today is around the concept of partnering with employers instead of educating them. We need to partner with employers because if we want disability employment as an outcome, we need ready, willing, and able disabled people and ready, willing, and able employers. And that's how we're going to get disability employment. And we do a lot of work on helping and assessing it and ensuring that we have ready, willing, and able disabled people. There's still plenty more that could be done and plenty more supports that could be there, but we're not necessarily as good at working with employers about how it relates to them. So we need to change that value proposition for them to be able to see the value. And the New Zealand Disability Employers Network's vision is New Zealand organisations realise the true potential of disabled and neurodivergent people to the benefit of everyone. And realise means actually realise there is potential, but also then bring that potential out and realise it. And to the benefit of everyone says, what we've actually got to structure is if we really want to set ourselves up for success, that is to structure it in a way that it is about the benefit to the disabled person, the benefit to the employer, and the benefit to the whole of society. And so Gretchen earlier talked about inclusive workplaces benefit everyone. We've heard it from multiple of the previous speakers. And I completely agree. There's just no way. I've seen studies that show as you go thing, the more diverse your team is, the more likely you are to be able to perform at the best and be one of the best. If your team is quite narrow, you're going to be an average performer at best. And that just goes to standard. But what we don't, and what we're not necessarily as good at, is working with employers in a language that works for them, that enables them to see the value that disabled people bring. We know the facts. We know that disabled people are actually less likely to take sick leave. They'll stay longer. They're as productive or more productive as the majority are as productive or more productive than their counterparts. The cost of hiring, all of that, it is either neutral or even sometimes cheaper. It's actually cheaper to have a disabled person on your team. So all of this, because of the supports and the mechanisms and everything that comes into play, all of this points out that we need to do that. And we're trying to get disabled people in, and coming back to the question of how do we, what value does it have to the disabled person? Actually, we should be asking the question, what value does it have to society? What's the return on investment for us as a whole society by doing that? And we actually can't meet our sustainability goals without doing disability inclusion. We can't reflect the Aotearoa that we want to be without doing disability inclusion. And we actually can't be the best workplaces we can be without doing disability inclusion. So at the NZDEN, we're doing a lot of things, and example of a model this model working really well, where we get the partnership working. We heard Paul talking about not knowing what to do during recruitment. We heard all of that. And accessible recruitment is absolutely not as hard as it looks. And we actually got employers, recruiters together and said, right, what's going on? An idea came out of KPMG. But then we've taken that back as a straw man model to the disability community. And we've been consulting on what we're calling ARMUP, which is a new accessible recruitment model, which overlays, and it makes a real big difference. The concept of changing this value proposition is actually such an important thing that we're giving an hour of a 2-day conference that we run, Disability Inclusive Pathways, in July, that will be getting employers to discuss just how we change that. So
And
ultimately,
I'll
I'm aware I'm at
just,
my time.
just to let you know, we're kind of over our 5 minute, but
Yeah,
it's
sorry.
an amazing conversation.
Yeah, so I'll cut there. But hopefully, if anyone wants to ask a question about disability statistics and universal design, because there's some really interesting information in that.
And thank you so much for that, Phil. Ngā mihi nunui me tō kōrero ne. Just have, again, the reminder that I know what I face as a disabled employee, but I also know the importance of flipping the paradigm with some of our employers around what benefits we are as employees for them, and changing that mindset in society. So thank you very much for that kōrero. So I'd like to hand it over to our next speaker, Marita Smith. Thank you for the pronunciation of your name, and hand that over to you now. Ngā mihi.
Kia ora, Patty, and kia ora koutou. It really is a privilege to be part of this kōrero today as one of the creators. Together with some of the peers who I have the greatest of respect for. So just to position us as Diversity Works, we have a holistic approach to workplace inclusion that's not focused on what we would call any one dimension of marginalization. So we look at labor market disadvantages through an intersectional lens, But the tools and the frameworks and the resources, and of course the overall leadership approach that we support in order to make equity real in workplaces across Aotearoa aligns quite closely with those more targeted approaches across some of those dimensions of diversity. So I suppose in this context, the take that I have on that very important question around why employment matters for disabled people is I want to take a bit of a more macro perspective, and this I probably want to say what Phil said to a large extent, and say before we talk specifically about disability, what is that more universal reflection of why does employment matter to anyone? And it matters not just for economic reasons, but it matters because it's a foundation for many of the things that make life meaningful for individuals, meaningful for families, for society. So it's that critical space where the answer comes to that deeper question of, do I matter? Do I matter here? And that is why employment isn't just a labor market issue. It is an issue of dignity and self-determination because it holds the key to people living their lives with purpose. And so when we ask what is the role of employment in relation to inclusion and belonging for disabled people, we are really asking the question, the broader question of what kind of society are we shaping through our workplaces? And I think that is the critical perspective here. So from a DI perspective, employment is a key site where structural inequity show up, as we've heard. So the key drivers of those are very, very complex. For instance, the inaccessibility of recruitment, inflexibility of job design, the persistent barrier of stigma, expectations where talent is overlooked and disabled people are cast only in support roles and not in leadership roles. But employment, and that really is the good news that we have, that's also one of the most powerful places and spaces where we can dismantle that inequity. And it is not just about fitting people into existing systems. It is about reshaping systems as a whole to reflect the diversity of human experience. And what's holding us back, actually, and that's a really interesting thing to say as a creator, what's holding us back isn't a lack of tools or frameworks. It's actually just a failure of imagination. Because we're not focusing, and we're so focused on reasonable accommodations that we're not asking the question about what would it look like to center disabled people in how we design work itself. And that is really, as creators, where we have a very special responsibility to help reimagine systems of employment and support organizations to move beyond that retrofitting so that we can build workplaces where disability isn't just an obligation, but it's a driver of innovation and creativity and cohesion. So what we want to know, what we want as DiversityWorks want to achieve is for employers to learn that if we want workplaces to be a cornerstone of social cohesion, which increasingly we're going to have to see workplaces play a role as, then disability inclusion must be more than a bolt-on. We need to build it up from leadership development into the way that we define talent, into the tech that we use, and into the narratives for success. And as I'm saying, we're not the experts on the detail of that, but that's certainly what we are advocating for in terms of general approaches. So that disability inclusion doesn't fix what is broken, it shows us what's possible and creates conditions for everyone to thrive. Ngā mihi nui.
Mihi nui, Marita. That was a beautiful conversation. I love that that conversation of innovation. And as someone who's diverse myself, as Māori, disabled, takatapui, and many other aspects, I know the importance of having that conversation of intersectionality. So ngā mihi nui I tō kōrero hohonui. Thank you for that very in-depth conversation. So I'd like to pass it over to Philip Hendry. Thank you, Philip.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, so Phil's stolen quite a bit of my thunder around trying to shift the conversation about employing a diverse workforce and disabled people as something that we should do because we feel responsible or I'm obliged to, but actually for the businesses that have done that, it's become a strategic enabler for those businesses. There's pretty solid research from Accenture, Deloitte, and others that comprehensively show businesses that do invest in diversity, that do hire disabled people, that do commit to those things as part of their corporate strategy rather than just doing it because they feel like they should or it's a nice thing to do. Typically about 30% more profitable than the equivalent business. And ultimately, businesses are about value creation for their customers. And I think that that's actually where we need to start to shift the narrative, because that gives the business an imperative for employers to participate. Because the reality is that if they don't, they're going to be left behind by people who do. And you can legislate all you like, and you can do all those other things, which is actually part of the puzzle. But it's about being able to communicate that value proposition coherently and clearly. But sort of bringing it back to what we do here at Workbridge, most of the organisations that we work with are small organisations. And one of the biggest barriers to employing diverse people into any smaller business is often driven by fear. And it's the fear of the unknown. We find that generally people want to do the best for the business and also do the right thing generally. But they just, people tend to hire people who look like me, who feel like me, because, they actually tend to wear lots of different hats and they're actually quite risk averse. And that's one of the big challenges that we have in helping small to medium businesses understand the benefits, because actually they are the employers. New Zealand, it's not the bigger companies, and it's much easier to have that conversation with the big companies, and they have the resources, etc., to actually come around. And that's really where we face challenges when we look at other jurisdictions, for example, like Germany, and try to overlay things that work in those sorts of economies to ours, but because they probably just won't. They're structurally different. The way things are set up are different. But sort of beyond that, what we need to do, I think, too, is reframe how we collectively work together. So that's about creating genuine pathways for disabled people to get into a career rather than a job. And we've heard others talk about what that looks like, but it starts right at the beginning with kids. Kids need to be able to see other disabled people like them succeeding, because that creates the belief that it can actually be done. That needs to be followed through. So when people traverse through school and enter into the world of work, that there's a method and a system that actually joins it up and actually makes that possible. Businesses need to think about how they avoid unnecessary discrimination. We've all heard about the driver's license thing, and even at an organisation like Workbridge, when I first actually started here, it was part of the requirements for our employment consultants. That's ridiculous.
Apologies, Philip, just letting you know it's the 5 minutes.
Sorry, I've I better wrap it up here because I can talk for a very long time about these things. I'm very
I
passionate.
can understand that. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I've spent 3 hours talking to someone on one topic. So ngā mihi o i tō kōrero, and it really your speech really does connect in with what Marita and Phil were sharing. But as a disabled person, we do understand the hustle that it is to find education, to find work, to stay in work. So we really do appreciate those conversations of how to raise it with employers, how to actually empower the those that impact on us actually finding employment and staying in employment. So ngā mihi nui. So I'd like to hand it over to Jennifer DeBell. Hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right too.
Pretty close, Patty. Thank you so much. Morena, everybody, and I have been listening in all morning. The conversations have been incredible, and I'm thrilled to be a part of this panel. Wonderful people here with really critical things to talk about. So for those of you who don't know what Downlights is, we're a social enterprise that employs young adults with Down syndrome and learning disabilities, and we manufacture luxury candles. I started Downlights after I had another candle business. So I had the opportunity to create a business model the way I wanted to create a business model. And for me, that was a business model that combined altruism and capitalism, and to address issues of diversity, equity, and inclusivity in the workplace. And this came as a result from conversations that I had with parents of people with disabilities who were applying for jobs with their children and weren't having anybody answer their emails, weren't even coming out to meet them if they went into a workplace to introduce their son or their daughter, or went in on their own. So from the outset, Downlights was created with the intention of providing meaningful work opportunities. And to understand what that looked like, I was really fortunate to meet incredible people like Grace Stratton and Dr. Robbie Francis Wittine, and also align myself with Recreate New Zealand, who was at the time piloting their Moxie program, Meaningful Opportunities Crossing into Work. So this began the shaping of Downlights as a business. And for me, I feel it has become a role model business that actually needs to be celebrated, because what we're trying to create is an example of what a meaningful employment opportunity can look like, in stark contrast to minimum wage exemption companies. We pay the living wage, and I've been an active member of the living wage movement for many years, and I call it out constantly and will continue to in the future in my life. So our hiring is purpose-led, and it is linked with collaborative partnerships that we have in place with the Pegasus Learning Center. And there's a lot I could talk about, but I'm actually going to concentrate on this collaboration that we have with Pegasus, because it is a way that employers can see and feel what it's like to have the experience of people with a disability working with them, and everything that everyone has said here in terms of how it shapes and changes the work environment, productivity, etc. You get that feeling when you partner with someone like them. However, we're one of the only businesses that they can rely on annually to offer work experience programs. And that really disturbs me, because they've come to me saying, can you take 12 students? We don't have anybody else. No other business that we've reached out to will take anyone on board. That concerns me for the future, because I know there is talk, but it's just the doing. Employers still need to do more. I've been listening a little bit to everybody talking about the sense of belonging and the sharing of stories. And that's one thing Downlights is really conscientious about doing, is sharing our crew's success, their achievements, what they achieve. But at the same time, we also share their challenges. And when I look at how things changed for Downlights post-COVID, 3 of our team members suffered such significant sensory issues that all of the training that they had at the beginning, which initially was funded by Ministry of Social Development, we were beneficiaries of that, it went out the door because we had to start all over again to retrain them. And there was no support for us for that. So that came from us as an employer. But I wanted to do that, and I chose to do it as an employer because inclusivity and creating a workplace that brought out the best in our team, it was always center in Downlights and always will be. So I still advocate for the type of business model that we have that is altruistic. It's still capitalistic. I want to make money. I want to continue to carry on keeping our team employed with more than living wage, with the opportunity to move up within the structure of Downlights. Hey, if we go global, there'll be lots of opportunities. So all our decisions have been made with inclusivity in mind, with discussions with our team and their parents. And I do hope that our business model can continue to be an example in the years forward. Thank you.
I just had one of those wow moments. You basically, I love hearing the passion that you have for your business in terms of creating it. Because I had a disabled friend who had a business where he hired predominantly disabled people and did really well. But when he had to engage with markets like Sony, well, it was quite a few years ago, the ableism he encountered, even though they were doing the work and doing it well. And so it is definitely an ongoing battle to actually create those spaces and those conversations and sharing those stories. So thank you very much, Jennifer. And sorry, because I let you go over time because I was loving the kōrero.
I'm sorry.
No. It was just beautiful hearing what we had in this creation space. So we have 9 minutes to answer any questions from our participants. And thank you for actually answering those. I've noticed that you've already answered one of the questions, Phil. But there was actually a really good question that I noted from previously from one of our participants I would like to ask. What techniques, approaches have been proven successful and has resulted in organisations reprioritising employing disabled people?
Is that for me? Sorry?
Yeah, for anyone. It's an open question. I know we've only got 9 minutes or 8 minutes.
And the one that answered, that I answered in the chat probably also is relevant. That's businesses operate on measurement analysis. How will the partnership model benefit the business bottom line? I was in the private sector before my disability, and I can assure you that this is not measurable. There is no drive and purpose. And this is where I absolutely think that we've got to reframe the value. And so the proven sort of models around this is building disability into the discussions. So one of the first things that you can ever do in an organization to make a difference is to start having your senior leaders talk about disability, celebrating the efforts that are happening inside the organization, bringing all of that forward and going there. I want to point out some statistics that aren't in the public domain, but which we've managed to get from Stats New Zealand. And so the new disability statistics that shrunk because of the way that the questions were asked, if you actually go and expand that, and I'll need to take 2 seconds to explain the way the questions were asked in the census. So we had 6 short questions, and I'll focus on the one about hearing and seeing. The questions were, do you have trouble seeing even while wearing glasses, or do you have trouble hearing even while wearing hearing aids? And you could say not at all, some, a lot, or can't do it all. And to be disabled, you need to have answered either a lot or can't do it all, which in the hearing is quite a small percentage of the society. But if we add in the ones that said some on the census, we go up to 14.3% of society, or 1 in 7 people. If we do it for hearing, we go up to 19.3% of people. So the whole concept of, and I think it was Richard was talking earlier about human-centered. We need to build workplaces where our people's needs are met, so that when our people's needs are met, they can perform for us And so it will be an absolute connection. And the way I put it is 100% of people have needs, whether they're access needs or gender needs or rainbow needs or sleep needs because the cat did a trap dance on your bladder at 3 a.m. this morning. Whatever it is, you've got those needs. And so how do you bring that forward and meet those needs? And so doing this actually benefits your existing workforce because there are people there with needs that aren't being met. And the way to do that is to bring it forward. So I'm not sure. I think I answered two questions slightly differently, but sorry, I've taken too much time.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much for answering that question. It just reminds me again I saw that question and it was a great question because how employers envision things is different from how employees do, as same as disabled versus non-disabled employers. So it is a very important conversation to have. We have room for one more question by the looks of it, 5 more minutes. I think there was a question there regarding WorkBridge and in terms of how WorkBridge can help people to recover, because from different experiences, as a person who's used WorkBridge and a person who's worked as an employment consultant for disabled, I've had my negatives and positives for working with WorkBridge. So it would be great to get your feedback on how WorkBridge can support. And sorry, I know 4 minutes, it's not much time to talk.
Sure. So the things that we can currently offer is really defined by what we're contracted to provide by the Ministry of Social Development. So so long as you meet the criteria of the contract that we actually work in, then we should be able to help you. So it's not a very clear answer, I'm afraid, but I'm not sure that this is probably the forum to get into the nuts and bolts of the employment placement contract that MSD contracts us to work in. But I guess in very broad terms, if you are unemployed and you have a disability, then we can help you.
Thank you. And I'd appreciate it if you could answer the questions from our participants, just because there's some very relevant, or provide them contacts with different people so they can access information that they need. So ngā mihi mai oha I tō kōrero I tēnei wā hangana. So thank you very much for speaking into the space of creation. And I'd like to hand it back over to Kimberly.
Thanks.
Oh, sorry, Julie. I don't know why I've got Kimberly on my brain.
I thought there was some kind of thing going on here that a blind woman didn't quite
Coffee
notice.
brain.
Ngā mihi nui kia koe, Patty, and to you and your panelists, thank you for your kōrero on this great topic. I'd like to remove the word criteria from the Oxford Dictionary, and I'd like to change the questions in the census. And not only is it inaccessible, but I'd love to answer that question, do I have difficulty in seeing, with no, I'm quite happily blind, but I know that would interfere with these statistics. So thank you, Phil, for raising that. Right, we are heading towards our fourth panel, which is the doers. And I know we've heard from the deciders and the thinkers and the creators, but without the doers, none of that would be put into action. So I'd like to welcome the moderator for this panel, Philip Paxton, the Managing Director of Diversity New Zealand. And Philip, I'd like to dedicate a quotation to you from Joan Baez, that famous American folk singer, who said, "Action is the antidote to despair."
Well, that's lovely. Thank you, Julia, for the info, and kia ora koutou, ngā mihi nui, great to be a part of this, and thank you for the opportunity. I just want to quickly say that even though we are the Jewish group, I think most people will realise that we have to actually do all of that to create meaningful change. So we need to make decisions, we need to think, we need to create, and we need to do. So I think we should just remember that it's not just one role that people take. And very quickly, I just want to point out that the number of panelists who haven't said in their bio whether or not they may have an invisible disability. And we have had quite a lot of seemingly non-disabled panelists. So please, the doers and who are also the others, please do hear if that's relevant. So I'd like to introduce Kate O'Leary, the CEO of Will Enable. Kia Kate, welcome. Sonia Thursby, CEO of Youth Disability in Ireland. Hi Sonia, it's been a while since we've seen each other. Regina Kirk, Director and Organisational Psychologist, God that's a mouthful, from Kindred Work. Sure and welcome. And this is like the formerly organisational change and leadership development at B-Lab, and a close colleague and friend of mine, so surely be welcome. So I'm going to be timing you guys. I will give you a 1 minute notification, and let's go and start with Kate. Thanks, Kate.
Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation today. My name is Kate O'Leary, and I'm the CEO of Will Enable. I'm new to the disability sector. I took this role in July of last year, and I do not have lived experience with a disability, so I am thrilled to be able to connect with all of you and join this conversation to help my understanding and learning as well. Will Enable is an organisation that provides employment to people with intellectual disabilities and neurodiversity. We've discovered that meaningful employment that truly creates inclusion and belonging, goes far beyond just providing a paycheck. We know that individuals with intellectual disabilities need genuine employment opportunities where they can thrive. And this is particularly crucial when we consider the sobering reality that only 36% of people with disabilities remain in open employment after 12 months. And this statistic underscores why organisations like Will Enable are essential bridges in the employment landscape. Last year, we were honoured to have Jenny Gibbs and her team from the University of Waikato research into our operations, and they highlighted the critical role that we play. We found that while open employment is often presented as the ideal goal, it's often not the best or most viable option for people with complex needs. Their research points out that those who thrive in open employment may have lower support requirements and a higher sense of well-being and independent living skills. So what does this mean for the employment sector? It means that we need diverse employment models that serve the full spectrum of abilities. Will Enable and other disability enterprises like us throughout New Zealand were built around this principle, directly supporting employment for people with disabilities who might otherwise fall through the gaps. Before joining Will Enable, many of our workers reported having little structure to their day, no sense of purpose. As one team member shared in the Waikato study, coming to work gets them up in the morning. And the best thing is that you're not the only one that has a disability. You're not out on your own. So our workers experience a supportive environment with significant encouragement, understanding, and accommodation of their very individual needs. So our approach emphasises several key elements, which I believe are essential for any employment sector committed to true inclusion. First, we recognise individual abilities and adapt accordingly. At Will Enable, we aim for every worker to have an individualised work plan that matches tasks, aspiration and training and opportunity to their specific skills. We create opportunities for growth and development. We had an impact report done a couple of years ago by the Impact Lab, and that Good Measure report shows that a significant percentage of our employees engage in various training programs, while the Waikato study recently also documented how workers take pride in mastering new skills and helping others. And finally, we foster a sense of community and belonging. And Dr. Gibbs's research highlighted the social connections that form at Will Enable, with workers describing finding partners, friends, and meaningful social interactions that weren't available to them before. We see firsthand how meaningful work creates ripple effects through individual lives and the lives of their families. According to our Good Measure Impact Report, Will Enable generates a social return on investment of $1.90 for every $1 invested in our employment program. This translates to a total social value of nearly $2 million annually. And for us, this shows the benefit of recognising that different employment models serve different needs and all contribute to a more inclusive and productive society. Thank you for letting me be a part of this conversation today.
Right, thank you, Kate. And just to sort of summarise, that thing of being beyond the paycheck and having meaningful work, adaptation, development, and that sense of belonging, because that is so important. Sorry, the second last time I couldn't stop the time. I'm just so that's it must be such so sorry.
You're giving us thinking time, Phil.
But maybe hopefully that's not too loud. So Sunny, can I pass on to you now? And I'll tune the thing off. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Did you say Sonia? Yep.
Yes.
Cool. Well, it is great to be here, and I have got pages of notes from listening this morning, which is amazing. So I'm the CEO of Yes Disability, and we work with predominantly young people. So in the employment space, our statistics will tell us that young people are some of the lowest employed in New Zealand. And if you add that young people with impairments, the chances of getting employment are really low. It also tells us that 80% of employment is found through social networks. And when our young people leave school, if they're not socially connected, whether they leave school at 17 or 21, their chances of employment are even less. So we decided some time ago that our focus will be young people, mainly because I was surrounded by young people, and I was once a young person. And being a young person, my best friend had a disability. And at the age of 3 and 4, nobody took any notice of us. We were just two little girls that liked dolls, etc. When we got to 13, 14 and older, then people started to treat us very differently. The expectation of me is that I would leave school, with or without qualifications, depending on how many times I managed to get myself there. But I would get a job. And the expectation on Kaz was just be nice, just was almost bless. So that was many, many, many years ago, and was really, and going back to what I think Gretchen said, is the acceptance in schools of the diversity is what is also going to shape our future. So working with young people with disabilities and employing them is so not a one size fits all. One of the things is we might send a young person with a disability on a 6-month course. In our experience, that doesn't work. It could take a year, it could take 2, it could take 3 years before they actually understand they go to work. I've had phone calls from young people saying, do I have to come to work today? Yep, it's where you work. So teaching that work ethic. And that has grown, and to put it in perspective, in the last 5 years, we've worked with over 5,000 young people with a variety of disabilities and non-disabled young people, and watching them support each other. Finding out what their dreams are. We're very good at asking young people with disabilities, what are your goals? Let's set some goals. But how often do we ask them, what are your dreams? We ask them if they want a job. How often do we ask them, what career would you like? Which is what we would ask a non-disabled young person. So we start with the dream. And the dream is often so low because they have no understanding of how brilliant they are and what they can achieve. So we're extremely, 80% of our staff at Yes Disability have lived experience of disability and are young people. And do we have a high turnover of staff? Yes. We don't want young people with disabilities to stay with us for the rest of their life and think that's the only job they can do. We want them stolen by other people because they're so incredible. And that's what happens. So as an organisation, one of my KPIs is what's the staff turnover? Well, hopefully it's great, because then the young people have built confidence and go on to other jobs, other careers. I look now around, I can see some young people working in Whaikaha, working in government departments, working for other community organisations because they've had exposure. Thank you. So for us, as I say, 80% of our staff, 80% of our governance board, I go back right to the beginning where someone said we need to sort out our own backyard first as organisations supporting disabled people, and we need to be the example of employers. And young people would tell me government need to measure every contract that goes out to provide services for young people with disabilities. What percentage of your staff are people with disabilities? So it's hard for me to preach to the big wide world of employers when I look in our own sector and go, we could be doing better. So that's, there's so many notes, so amazing. But doers, young people are doers. So, and they should be here, and my apologies for speaking on behalf of them. But I do have their permission to share their stories.
Thanks, Veronica. Really interesting, and I've known myself that that social contact around being jobs is really important, and I think we often don't realise that most jobs are because of relationships. So that's great. Thank you. Now on to Georgina. Welcome again, and great to have you here. Hey.
Thanks, Philip. And I'm very excited to be on this lineup. Honestly, I found that really interesting. So thank you to Kate and Sonia. I am George. I work with mainstream employers at Kindred, and we do a lot of work around designing employment processes as well as development programs and all things across the life cycle of employment. I'm really here today, though, to talk about a partnership that we've had through Kindred with the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association. We've worked with people with Down syndrome, their whānau, and prospective employers to understand what is the missing piece around employment for people with Down syndrome and other learning disabilities. We've created guides through this that live on our website, but also the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association website for job seekers, and also for prospective employers that match, so that everyone can have shared expectations on what a mainstream recruitment process looks like and what amendments or adjustments we can make. We've also been really lucky to support a few people with Down syndrome into paid employment, and we've also worked with some amazing supported agencies like Moxie along the way. But in terms of employment, I wanted to share my perspective as a sibling of a 20-something-year-old brother with Down syndrome. So he's been doing work experience since leaving school. So Sonia, really important point that you made there, which has been voluntary. So in late 2023, we got an opportunity for him to move into paid employment with Nando's. They reached out to the New Zealand Down Syndrome Association. He had an interview with the manager there and moved into a role a couple of days a week. The change that's happened for him has been a real standout. Every day he finishes his shift, he checks his app for his pay, he talks about his manager and his friends at work. He meets new people. When he meets new people, he always tells them that he works at Nando's as one of the first things that he shares about himself. And he also has a video, a case study of his employment that he loves. Any new person that he meets, he loves them to watch that. So he's really, really proud of his job there. This is really the thing about employment, and all of us have this. It's a key pillar for all of us. It contributes to our life through our identity, our social interaction. Hopefully we have fun at work. Money is also important to all of us, and all of these things kind of contribute to why employment is so important. As we know, and as we've covered off, there are a lot fewer people with disabilities in work, especially with people with Down syndrome. And we know that it's not for a lack of trying. We also know that a lot of people with disabilities would like to work more than what they already are. So in my experience as mainstream employers, the best thing we can do for this community is really simple, and it's to hire someone different. We do disability awareness training in our big corporates, but we don't necessarily walk the talk. So the best way that I've seen anyone learn in this space is by finding a great person. If you're a big organization, get some great people in, and then do the disability awareness training, then wrap that support around those people. As we spoke about, it's individual. What we all need, what anyone with a disability needs is different and individual. So it's about providing the support to that person that's needed. It's about asking them, getting in there and doing. And it's okay to make mistakes. We're all learning in this space. To my last point, so as people with disabilities, whānau, friends, or support people, as Sonia said, the most common way people in New Zealand get jobs is through their networks.
Oh, 1 minute, Christy.
Thank you. And through our research with New Zealand Down Syndrome Association, we know that that's especially the case for people with Down syndrome. So we would always say, reach out to your networks. You know, if you're a whānau or support person or someone with a learning disability, get in there and ask for that opportunity, because those are the most likely people that will take a chance on someone with Down syndrome. For people with Down syndrome, it starts really small. It's every business thinking about, what if we hired someone with a learning disability? It's good for business, it's great for that person, and the research also tells us it's amazing for everyone else in that workplace. So that's me. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, George, for that. wonderful to hear that three is the word sun, because don't we forget that in work, you know, that it's all serious and great to hear that word, and also good to realize the importance of being able to make mistakes so that we can learn and develop. Okay, we're running a bit over time. Sorry, I'm talking too much. But last but certainly not least, Leslie, welcome again, and over to you.
Thank you, Philip, and thanks everyone. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this today. It's a bit weird sort of being in the doing group because I'm no longer in the doing group. I have many decades of being in the doing group, and I have as many decades as well being in both the thinking and the other groups as well. I think Einstein said, if I was given 1 hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it. And then I'd spend 5 minutes, you know, in the doing. So I think, just to make the point, that unless there is some real depth of strategic thinking behind all of those things that we're currently doing, we're perhaps not, we're at risk of perhaps not putting in the time thinking that we need to. And I'm sure everybody here has done that. I'm really sorry I couldn't join right at the beginning because there were so many interesting people and topics that I was listening to. And I really apologize if I cover off on some things that people have previously talked about. But I've just heard a few things and I've just put lines through them. Can I start by saying here that no two people in the world experience the world in the same way? We start from that point. We're not binary. We're not, men don't experience the world in the same way that women do. We're not binary in any way at all in society. So it just always really fascinates me that we design institutions and places and things for the average person. And I've no idea who that is. I'm not sure whether you do. So if we start from that point that no two people experience the world in the same way, I wonder why we don't have the conversation right at the beginning when we're engaging with people to understand how best that individual can engage in whether it's meaningful work or study or learning or whatever it is. One of the questions that used to be right at the beginning of any talent search that I was ever a part of, right throughout my career, is tell me about those things that you need in order to make this situation really successful for you. And I wonder why that isn't a question that we don't put at the beginning of every engagement that we have with people, whether they are a disabled person looking for a job, looking for a house, it's such an interesting question to ask. The thing is, if we start conversations and engagement by asking that question, we have to genuinely be curious enough to deeply listen to the answer and be prepared to act upon it. We're more likely to do that if we are putting value on the person we are engaging in, and that we see value in the difference that that person might communicate with us. We're stuck in an old conversation when we're looking at employment, and it just drives me nuts. I don't know whether it drives you nuts. I'm so sick of this conversation. Aren't you? How many decades have we been having this conversation about the outrageous levels of unemployment of people with disabilities? You've probably been through the stats. 2022, 45% participation rate in the workforce for disabled people, 83.1 for non-disabled people. You've probably talked about that. And among that 45%, I would put everything I own, which isn't that much, but significant to me. I put everything I own on that participation not being 45% of meaningful participation. and participation in an employment opportunity that enables the person to be economically independent and to have a deep sense of belonging and worth and value. Have you talked about this morning the social cohesion report that recently came out that Shamabeel Ekwab wrote for the Helen Clark Foundation? No. Okay. So get hold of that. It's a really interesting report. Helen Clark Foundation, you can just download it. So this report looks into social cohesion in New Zealand. And he talks about social cohesion is the glue that holds a society together, the opposite of which is polarization. And if we're looking around the world at the moment and paying attention to what's going on, we're seeing absolutely polarization everywhere. We are living in such uncharted territory at the moment. So it's so challenging for us. And what I know is when times were easier, it was still difficult to get employers to see the value of employing somebody with disability. So we're living in really difficult times. What came out of this was that only 49% of New Zealanders agree with positive statements that indicate social cohesion. And he compares that with 56% of Australians. So we're lagging behind Australians when we think of our society being socially cohesive.
So Lucy, time's up.
My time's up. Okay, I'm just going to say these things. There were three top concerns for people talking about a lack of social cohesion. The first was climate change, and, you know, of course. The second was housing affordability, but the third was employment. We really need to get our heads around how we can shift the conversation about of employment to employing talent and value, not to the cost of investing in people with disabilities. We need to shift the conversation and we need to be courageous. Thank you.
That's it. I'm saying quote, very important. And talking about average, scientifically there is no average person. If you see it's on TED.com, there's a really good talk about the myth of average. So yeah. So I think we're on to Q&A. And I'm looking at Q&A or the text for this. Someone.
Chat, I think, isn't it, Juliana?
I'll just put something in chat for you, Philip.
Thank you, Kimberly.
Okay, great. So this thing is, what do people think about the exemption on the minimum wage for disabled people?
Can you just repeat that, Philip? What do people think about the what of minimum wage?
Wage exemption?
The wage exemption. So
oh my
people
God.
can pay disabled people lower than the minimum wage.
So I'm just having a brain explosion about that. So I think it's better that somebody more, rational than me on this topic answers it.
Well, I assume I'm probably the person that question was directed to, given I am work at Will Enable. So I think the question that I saw in the Q&A was, does Will Enable employ people under the minimum wage exemption? And yes, we do. We employ people under the minimum wage exemption, and we also employ people at minimum wage. The question I think also was why. And for us, quite frankly, we would not be a viable business if we didn't employ people under the minimum wage exemption. And so I think for us, it's about this is the I guess, the framework in which we are able to operate. And so therefore we do take advantage of it. I was interested earlier listening to Juliana's discussion around the quota system that's used elsewhere. And she said that in Brazil, the quota that was applied to people with over 100 employees was a requirement to hire 2 to 5% of their employees as people with disabilities. So for us, we have over 2/3 of the people that we employ have disabilities, primarily intellectual disabilities. If we were subject to that quota, we would have 7 employees with disabilities as opposed to 100. So the economics and dynamics of that are quite different. And I think for us, utilising the minimum wage exemption framework enables us to increase the number of people we employ with disabilities and still function and provide that supported working environment.
You know, as you quickly, how do you decide who to pay minimum wage or under?
There is a process that we go through. So all of the disability business enterprises use a assessment process. Each of them differ slightly. For Will and Able, we have somebody come and spend 3 days working with our team as on different elements of work as a process worker in our environment. They get rated and assessed on a number of different capabilities, skills, and so forth. That is then discussed with them and their caregiver post that experience, and we let them know what wage we would be paying them based on that assessment. It then goes to a labour inspector at MB, a third-party person, and that person looks at the assessment in totality and approves it.
Okay, so quite a rigmarole.
Well, it's a process, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, Philip. Can I just say also, way back in the beginning, I'm not sure if you were on the call then, Leslie, but we were given some statistics about volunteering and the high percentage of disabled people who volunteer. And my question is always around that: is it volunteering or is it unpaid work?
Yeah.
And the same as we see lots of unpaid internships. Again, my same question. So I think within the employment sector, there's a discussion needs to be had around what is employment, what is volunteering, and what is unpaid work, because there's many young people who come to work with us who are all paid a living wage, who have been volunteering for 3, 4, 5 years in the same place doing the same thing. So I think for me, employment is a much bigger picture, and I'm using the word exploitation around that as well. So and on that too, Sonia, I'll just add, we don't look at, so none of our people who are on the exemption work a full week. They only want to work part-time. They also receive the supported living payment. So combined with what they receive from us as a wage, that generally adds up to more than minimum wage, or at least minimum wage as a combined amount. And it's interesting, we actually have had caregivers and people ring us and say, please can you reduce the amount of pay that these people are getting if their hours increase, because the supported living payment, the benefit works very closely in with the amount of money they receive as a wage. And often people don't want the supported living payment to be reduced by increasing the wage. Yep, it's just a big ugly mess, really, isn't it? You're not encouraging people to achieve or grow or have those dreams and goals when every which way you can be penalised.
Yes, but then on the other hand, we've also had people who've come off the exemption and gone to minimum wage and have been happy to make that change. So it really is very individual, and I think that's the key thing too, is that it's about the decision the individual wants to make.
Sorry,
my
Philip.
first question was only got 4 minutes left, and there's one more question. How do you get non-disabled employees to buy into the importance of employing disabled people?
Have a quick go at that.
Yeah.
One of the things we learned at B over 13 years was the only way to get sustainable change in any business and organization is to get equitable access in everything to do with employment written into the strategic level of the business. It has to be part of it has to be a core part of the values of the business, what we're here to do and why. There needs to be a strong story to be able to tell about this is who and how we are, and this is how we do things. Because we all know that you can find terrific people in any organization who want to make a difference. And you can engage with them and you can get change with that person. That person leaves and you're back to square one again. The only way to get strategic long-term change is to work at that top level. Now, that is so hard because businesses and organizations, they're really risk averse, they're really conservative, they're lacking in imagination often, and they're still talking about equity in terms of, well, this year we're doing women. We're going to look at equal pay for women this year. And next year we're going, it's a really hard question. It's a really hard conversation to have. So we need to get braver and we need to stop having those stupid conversations that don't go anywhere and really hit it at that high level of strategic value.
Thank you. I'm going to wind up here. We've got 2 minutes left, so
Sorry, Philip, Juliana here.
yeah.
I just think that Sonia, you wanted to add something before, if you can.
Oh, sorry.
No, I'm good. I think I agree with Leslie. It has to be strategic, and then it has to be a decision to write into somebody's job description that that's part of their role. So it goes all the way through the DNA of the organization.
And I just want to add, and not to throw you under the bus, Kate, but the minimum wage exemption is a blunt human rights violation. It could be an analogy to, modern day slavery. We need to find a better way to address that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would say we work within the framework we've been given by the government. I know that there was a discussion with the previous government to change that, and I think the current government's put that on hold. I think the disability enterprises like Will Enable are open to conversations and change around any of this. It's, we just see the value of what we do is huge in terms of providing employment, and ideally we wouldn't exist, but we're required. I think, we're talking about having it will enable turnover targets that are actually a positive turnover where we see people move into open employment. And I think for us, it's about seeing this as will enable as a stepping stone. And perhaps there's, a new framework that can be determined, but I think it needs to have input from everybody who's involved to arrive at the right framework.
We've got one more question from one of the attendees who needs an interpreter. So can that end here? And then I'm gonna
I'll put my microphone on.
Anne, you've been spotlighted.
Hello. Thank you for inviting me to come to this conversation. it's really helpful. It's given me quite a lot of information and thinking about some of the bigger picture. I should introduce my name is Anne Wirral. I've also looking at setting up a business in the future. So the things that I'm really interested in around, I'm aware that I'm not the only one, but that there are many other deaf people or people with disabilities. For example, when I look for some grants, through my applications, I've talked about my employment history, talked about the costs associated with what I'm looking at establishing around grants. And when you send those applications through to the fund holders, I don't get replies. I don't get replies from fund holders, which is creating severe barriers for myself. Because it's often seen as I'm a stranger. People don't know who I am, but I am deaf, and I think other people with other disabilities who also want to establish their own businesses face those barriers, may not have the same networks. And so what I think is important is around ensuring things like ensuring like on TVNZ that there's captions available. That's what I'm looking at. So you're looking at English and Te Reo Māori captions being available, as well as an interpreter being available on one other channel for everything, so that is accessible for people with hearing impairments or those who are deaf. That's the kind of advocacy area that I'm looking at ensuring. So yeah, and those are some of the challenges that I'm facing. And I think that for those people in New Zealand or others who have an interest in that area, I would really love to connect with and work with others around creating a more accessible Aotearoa in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate that. Thank you, panel, again. Just want to leave you with one paradoxical question. Why is our employment so important to our identity? So I'll leave that question hanging in the air, and that's you, Julie. And sorry for going over. That's what happens when you the last one.
Kia ora, Philip. Thank you. And it was well worth it. Thank you to you and your panel for that important kōrero and all the points that you have raised. We have reached the end of this kōrero for change on employment. I'm that blind woman, Julie Woods. I've been your MC for today. Thank you to Juliana Calvajo and Kimberly Graham for putting this webinar together. Thank you to all our moderators, our panelists, and of course to all of you who are listening in and attending this webinar. We all are part of this discussion. As a coach, I would like to ask a question of you. What's one thing you are going to do differently as a result of being on this webinar today? Thank you once again. There is a survey in the chat. So Kimberly and Juliana ask if you are able to complete that survey. That would be fantastic. And we will now hand over to Patty to do our closing karakia. Kia ora, Patty.
Tēnei te mihi nui I te mahi o Access Matters I tēnei kaupapa nui o ngā mana o ngā tangata whaikaha. So I just want to give thanks to Access Matters and engaging in this conversation around the mana of our disability community. So me karakia tātou. And aroha mai, we've also put the karakia up in the chat, both the Te Reo version and the English version. Me inoi, me karakia tātou, kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki a ihu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu. Ake, 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 āmene.
Āmene. Mā te wā.
Āmihi.